Welcome to TrueRadar. Before we begin tonight's investigation, take a moment to get comfortable. Adjust your volume, lower your lights, and let go of the day behind you. Tonight, we step away from the isolated forests of the past and look toward a different kind of boundary. We journey to the year 1991, to a colossal, gleaming cathedral of glass and steel, rising out of the sun-scorched Arizona desert. A futuristic monument designed to lock humanity inside and seal the rest of the world out. A place where an invisible, creeping threat slowly began to consume the air itself, turning a utopian dream of survival into a silent, suffocating trap. Close your eyes. Let the rhythm of the rain clear your mind as we scan the dark for the truth. In the vast, arid expanse of the Sonoran Desert, roughly 50 kilometers north of Tucson, Arizona, the horizon is dominated by rugged mountains, dry brush, and cacti. It is a landscape defined by extreme heat, open space, and a harsh, unforgiving sun. But in the late 1980s, an incredibly strange and ambitious structure began to rise out of this wilderness. It was a massive, futuristic complex that looked completely alien to the desert floor. A sprawling geometric network of white space frames and crystalline glass panels covering more than 3 acres of land. This architectural marvel was known as Biosphere 2. The name was chosen to signify its purpose. If Earth itself was Biosphere 1, this sealed facility was to be the second, a completely independent, self-sustaining micro-world. It was funded by a wealthy visionary and designed by a team of countercultural ecologist engineers who believed that humanity's future lay in colonizing space. To travel to the Moon or Mars, humans would need to bring Earth's ecosystems with them. Biosphere 2 was built to prove that a completely closed system could support human life indefinitely, without any physical connection to the outside world. The scale of the project was unprecedented. Beneath the glass canopy, engineers and scientists spent years constructing miniature versions of Earth's primary biomes. They imported thousands of tons of rich soil, planted over 3,000 distinct species of flora, and introduced hundreds of small animals, insects, and marine life. There was a dense, humid rainforest, complete with an artificial mountain and a waterfall. There was a dry savanna, a mangrove wetland, a sprawling agricultural area for farming, and even a miniature ocean containing a living coral reef. It was a masterpiece of technological and ecological engineering, entirely sealed off from the rest of the planet by a heavy liner of stainless steel buried beneath the dirt. To test this artificial world, a human crew was required. Out of hundreds of applicants, 8 researchers were chosen, 4 men and 4 women. They were specialists in agronomy, marine biology, engineering, and medicine. On the morning of September 26, 1991, the 8 researchers stood before a massive crowd of journalists, scientists, and onlookers. They wore matching dark blue, futuristic jumpsuits, looking less like biologists and more like astronauts preparing to launch into deep space. With the world watching, the crew walked through the heavy mechanical airlock. The steel doors swung shut, and a series of heavy deadbolts turned into place, establishing an airtight seal. For the next 24 months, the crew was meant to live in total isolation. No fresh air from the outside would enter. No water would be pumped in. No food or supplies would be delivered. Every breath they took, every drop of water they drank, and every calorie they consumed had to be generated entirely by the closed ecosystem around them. It was hailed as the most significant human experiment since the Apollo moon landings. In the initial weeks of the mission, the glass world functioned with a quiet, hypnotic regularity. The 8 biospherians fell into a structured, daily routine. They spent their mornings working the agricultural fields, harvesting sweet potatoes, beans, and rice. They tended to the small livestock, monitored the chemistry of the indoor ocean, and repaired the complex machinery hidden in the massive basements below the dirt. At night, they gathered in the central kitchen to cook meals from their harvest, their voices echoing softly beneath the towering glass arches. Outside, visitors and tourists would gather along the perimeter fences, peering through the glass panels to watch the researchers go about their daily lives. To the public, it was a flawless glimpse into the future of human civilization. The sun warmed the glass. The automated wave machine lapped rhythmically against the artificial beach, and the plants flourished in the humid air. It appeared to be a perfect, peaceful equilibrium. But beneath the surface of this manufactured paradise, an invisible anomaly was beginning to form. By the third month of the experiment, the internal sensors tracking the composition of the air began to register a subtle, creeping deviation. The oxygen levels inside the dome were falling. In a normal, healthy atmosphere on Earth, oxygen sits consistently at around 21%. Inside Biosphere 2, that number was slowly, methodically ticking downward. At first, the decline was so microscopic that the crew didn't feel any physical changes. They assumed the plants and the soil were simply adjusting to the seasonal shifts of the Arizona winter outside. But as the months rolled into 1992, the drop accelerated. The oxygen levels fell to 19%, then 18%, showing no signs of stabilizing. The physical toll of this atmospheric decline soon became unavoidable. The 8 biospherians began to experience the early stages of chronic hypoxia. They found themselves waking up in the dead of night, gasping for air as their respiratory systems panicked in the thinned atmosphere. A terrifying condition known as sleep apnea. During the day, simple tasks like lifting a crate of vegetables or climbing a short flight of stairs left them completely exhausted and breathless. Their lips and fingernails began to take on a faint, bluish tint. Their speech slowed, and their cognitive abilities began to dull under the constant, suffocating pressure of an invisible shortage. Compounding the crisis of the air was a severe shortage of food. The winter of 1991 had been unusually cloudy in Arizona, starving the glass dome of the vital sunlight needed for crop production. The corn and wheat withered, and the agricultural zone failed to yield the expected calories. The crew was forced to ration their food severely, plunging them into a state of constant gnawing hunger. They lost significant amounts of body weight, their skin grew gaunt, and their physical energy plummeted. The combination of low oxygen and constant starvation had a devastating effect on the human psychology inside the enclosure. The initial camaraderie and scientific enthusiasm evaporated, replaced by a heavy, toxic irritability. The crew fractured into 2 bitter, opposing factions of 4. They disagreed fundamentally on how to manage the failing crops and how to handle the atmospheric crisis. The hostility became so absolute that the 2 groups stopped speaking to each other entirely. They would pass one another in the lush green trails of the artificial rainforest, or sit across from each other in the laboratory in complete, suffocating silence. The futuristic utopia had transformed into a psychological pressure cooker, where 8 isolated individuals were trapped together in a silent war for survival. Outside the glass, the management team and the scientific community were deeply alarmed. They could see the telemetry data showing the plummeting oxygen, but they were trapped in a profound scientific mystery. They could not understand where the oxygen was going. If there was a physical leak in the structure, the atmospheric pressure would have dropped, and outside air would have rushed in. but the pressure sensors indicated the seal was completely intact. The glass was unbroken, and the steel liner beneath the earth was secure. The oxygen wasn't escaping into the desert. It was disappearing inside the building. An invisible entity within the closed ecosystem was actively consuming the air, leaving the scientists completely baffled. It was a closed-room mystery on an unprecedented ecological scale. As the experiment entered its second year, the situation within Biosphere too crossed from uncomfortable into genuinely dangerous. By January of 1993, the oxygen levels inside the dome had plummeted to a catastrophic 14.5%. This was the atmospheric equivalent of living at an altitude of over 4,000 meters above sea level, higher than the peaks of many mountain ranges. The crew could barely function. They suffered from constant headaches, profound short-term memory loss, and severe fatigue. The miniature world was dying around them too. Many of the introduced insect species had gone extinct, while invasive cockroaches and crazy ants exploded in population, swarming across the glass walls. The mystery of the vanishing oxygen was finally solved, not by analyzing the machinery or the plants, but by examining the very foundation of the structure itself. To ensure the agricultural zone would be incredibly fertile, the designers had imported vast quantities of rich soil heavily packed with organic compost. But they had underestimated the sheer volume of microscopic life within that soil. The warm, humid conditions inside the dome had triggered a population explosion of hyperactive soil bacteria. These billions of microbes were consuming the oxygen at an exponential rate, exhaling massive amounts of carbon dioxide. But this discovery created a second puzzle. If the bacteria were exhaling massive amounts of carbon dioxide, the air sensors should have shown a dangerous spike in carbon dioxide gas. Yet, the carbon dioxide levels remained surprisingly stable. Where was the carbon dioxide going? The investigators looked closer at the physical construction files of Biosphere 2 and found the final, chilling answer. To support the massive weight of the steel and glass canopy, engineers had poured over 10,000 tons of liquid concrete to form the internal walls, foundations, and footings of the biomes. But concrete takes an incredibly long time to fully cure. Inside the sealed, humid environment, the exposed concrete walls were continuously absorbing the carbon dioxide directly from the air, chemically locking it away into the building's infrastructure as calcium carbonate. The mystery was laid bare. The very environment they had engineered to sustain life was actively working against them. The soil bacteria were eating the oxygen, and the concrete walls were swallowing the carbon dioxide. The structure itself was methodically, silently, suffocating the inhabitants inside. By the spring of 1993, the medical team on the outside determined that the crew was at risk of suffering permanent, irreversible neurological damage if the oxygen dropped any further. The organizers of the project faced a devastating dilemma: breaking the airtight seal to rescue the crew or alter the atmosphere would mean admitting scientific failure to a deeply critical public. But human lives were on the line. The decision was made to intervene. In secrecy, technicians connected heavy hoses to the exterior ports of the facility. Over several days, they pumped thousands of pounds of pure, pressurized oxygen directly into the sealed atmosphere. Inside the dome, the effect was instantaneous and profound. The biospherians described the sensation as a sudden, overwhelming rush of clarity and energy. Their headaches vanished, their minds cleared, and their bodies were flooded with a deep sense of relief as their lungs finally found the oxygen they had been denied for months. The physical intervention saved the mission from a medical evacuation, allowing the 8 researchers to endure the final months of their sentence. On September 26, 1993, Exactly 2 years to the day after they entered, the heavy steel airlock of Biosphere 2 was unbolted from the outside. The 8 Biospherians stepped out into the fresh Arizona air. They were noticeably thinner, physically weathered, and deeply marked by the intense isolation and psychological friction of their experience. The media immediately branded the project an absolute failure, a multi-million-dollar scientific stunt that had succumbed to human error, mechanical intervention, and internal drama. The dream of using the structure as a perfect blueprint for space colonization had fractured under the weight of its own complexity. But as the decades have passed, the legacy of Biosphere 2 has shifted. Today, scientists recognize that the experiment was a massive, unintentional success in a completely different way. It proved that despite hundreds of millions of dollars, cutting-edge technology, and the finest scientific minds, humanity cannot easily replicate or improve upon the incredibly complex, interlocking systems of our planet. It showed that nature cannot be reduced to a simple equation or a flawless machine. The mystery of the glass dome was solved, leaving behind a profound, humbling lesson about the fragile, invisible balances that allow us to survive. Close your eyes. Let the steady rhythm of the falling rain wash over the dark glass panes of the abandoned dome. The desert is quiet. The air inside is still, and the long experiment has finally settled into peace. Sleep, and let the mystery fade into the dark.